Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk are two leaders in the obesity drug market. In the past, both companies experienced a massive revenue and stock growth, but now they're diverging as analysts are expecting a continued growth from Lilly and a slow to flat growth from Novo Nordisk. In this video, we'll compare both companies to see which one comes ahead through a value investment standpoint. But before we jump into it, a disclaimer that this is not a financial advice, and I own Novo Nordisk stock and look to buy Lilly for the right price. First, let's start where the two companies are similar. Similarity number one is that both companies are the undisputed leaders in the GLP-1 market. They both produce blockbusters medicine for type 2 diabetes and chronic weight management. Their primary growth is currently driven by these two metabolic treatments, which have transitioned from niche diabetes care to mainstream lifestyle and health critical weight loss drugs. Similarities number two is because demand for these metabolic drugs has consistently outpaced supply, both firms are currently behaving more like industrial infrastructure companies. They are both investing tens of billions of dollars into fill and finish sites and manufacturing plants globally to scale up the production of their injection pens. Here we have two graphs to confirm this. The first one shows gross property, plant and equipment for Novo in orange and Lilly in green. And what we can observe here is that Novo doubled its property, plant and equipment, while Eli Lilly lagged behind somewhat. And on the other graph we have net property, plant and equipment, which again shows that both companies invest heavily into this, but again Novo Nordisk outpaced Lilly on this front. And also the fact that Novo Nordisk's net value stays closer to its gross value implies the equipment is newer on average in comparison to Eli Lilly, which has a bigger gap. But also keep in mind that Lilly often utilizes more contract manufacturing organizations to scale, which wouldn't show up on their balance sheet. Which is a better approach is up to debate, as owning more facilities as Novo has can mean you can act faster with, let's say, ramp-ups. Especially if your contract manufacturers are already at capacity, you might not be able to achieve this. So this is a shortfall of Lilly. But also, you have to take the responsibility to have newer and most up-to-date equipment, and you also have to maintain this equipment. But also keep in mind that once the process in this industry is set, it's almost impossible to change it. So Novo is betting that volume will eventually offset these lower prices if new regulations come into play. Newer plants are generally more efficient and have lower maintaining costs, and however, it also means Novo will face heavy depreciation charges on its income statement for the next decade, which might suppress their paper earnings even if they are selling a record amount of product. So even though they are both making sure to have more products available, they're not taking exactly the same path. So let's see what else is different between them. Differences number one is therapeutics breadth versus specialization. Novo Nordisk has historically been a highly specialized pure play in diabetes and rare endocrine disorders. While they are exploring and expanding into cardiovascular and kidney disease, their identity remains deeply rooted in metabolic health. On the other hand, Eli Lilly maintains a much broader portfolio. In addition to metabolic health, Lilly is a major player in oncology, immunology, and neuroscience, especially with their recent focus on Alzheimer's treatments. We'll also later see this confirmed by both companies' pipeline. And difference number two is structure. Novo Nordisk has a unique European foundation model, which brings more stability in the company itself. It might be slower, but it gives stability priority over chasing trends and profits for all costs. On the other hand, Eli Lilly is a traditional, publicly traded US corporation. We already saw this graph at the start of the presentation, but now let's take a closer look. Both Lilly and Novo Nordisk grew above industry averages from 2020 to 2025. Industry on average grew at 6.9%, while Lilly grew at 21.6% and Novo grew at 19.5%. But in the next 3 years, this is a completely different story. Lilly's growth will slow down to around 15.5%, while Novo will grow at only 6%, with fall in 2026, while industry average is expected to be at around 7%. What this means is that Novo will grow slower than the industry average. And this is not a good sign for the investments they have made into the production, as it seems they will need to lower prices to keep up with Eli Lilly more effective drugs. But more on that later. Now if you look, we can compare how much of their drugs is sold in US and how much of that is sold outside. By combining Mounjaro and Zepbound, we can see that 74% of sales is made in the US and only 26% is made outside of it. On the other hand, for Wegovy and Ozempic, we have a little bit better picture with 68% of sales being made in US while only 32% are made outside of it. So both companies are very dependent on the US market, so any shifts here can have a negative impacts on the earnings. Now to see how big of a market this actually is in 2025, the total GLP market was roughly valued at $68 billion. This is all together with Lilly, Novo Nordisk and also Sanofi and other companies that are in this market. So in 2026, Fortune Business Insights expects this market to be valued at roughly $73.4 billion. In terms of market share by drugs sold, Eli Lilly currently holds almost 54% over Novo Nordisk 46%. And this takes into account Mounjaro, Zepbound for Lilly and Ozempic and Wegovy for Novo Nordisk. And one interesting data point is also if we look at Mounjaro, which makes 23 billion in 2025 sales, and Zepbound, which made 30.5 billion, represents 56% of total revenue of Eli Lilly. And for Novo is even worse, as Ozempic and Wegovy accounts for 66.7% total revenue of this company. So any shifts in these drugs can have a very big impact on the stock price of both companies. Before we continue, please consider subscribing and liking this video, as it takes quite a lot of time to create these presentations. Number of drugs over 1 billion in revenue, with Novo Nordisk having 6 drugs that make over 1 billion and Eli Lilly has only 2 more, with Roche being the leader with 16. Another interesting data is that Lilly has 3 drugs in the obesity and diabetes space, while Novo has 4. So again, Lilly is better positioned in a case of the market turnaround. But definitely it is not immune. On this graph we also have Lilly market share and Novo market share over the last 5 years. And this takes into account Mounjaro and Zepbound by Lilly and Ozempic and Wegovy by Novo Nordisk. And what we can observe is that Lilly overtook Novo for the first time in 2025, and these are the numbers we talked about earlier. Now before we go into the conclusions, let's look at some other financial metrics which again tell the same story as revenue. EBITDA, again, what we can see is flat growth from Novo, while Eli Lilly is growing at record pace. Cash flow from operations tells again the same story, flat line for Novo Nordisk while growth for Eli Lilly. And the same goes for net income. Now let's quickly go over margins, and here over the long term Novo Nordisk comes ahead both for gross margins and for profit margins, but both companies are well above industry average, which is drug manufacturers general. But if we look at closer numbers, we can see that in 2025, both for gross margins and for profit margins, Lilly again overtook Novo Nordisk. So that would be a very interesting thing to look in the coming quarters and in the coming year. So definitely keep an eye on these margins. Now performance benchmark, here again both companies outperform the industry average. Return on equity, here goes the point to Lilly, as it had achieved 71%, while industry average is almost 2 times smaller, while Novo Nordisk is not far behind with 67%, but it had quite a big fall in 2025. Return on assets, on the other hand, here we switch things around, as long-term average is at 24% for Novo, while for Lilly is at 13%. But again, for both companies, they are well above industry average. And again, 2025 numbers for Novo Nordisk are much lower than recent history and much more in line with Eli Lilly. Three another important metrics are liabilities to equity, current ratio, and debt to EBITDA. And here what we can observe is that liabilities to equity show a very big difference in financial philosophy. So this shows that Lilly has been comfortable using debt and revolving credit to fund its massive research and development manufacturing expansions. But falling numbers also means that even though Lilly is spending billions on factories, their retained earnings are growing so fast they're filling up the equity side of the balance sheet and reducing the reliance on debt. On the other hand, Novo has a massive margin of safety and it's very much more stable than Lilly. Current ratio, on the other hand, what we want to see here is a target above 1.5. Novo unfortunately doesn't get a point as they might have problem paying short-term debt, as it was for the last 5 years it was well below 1. But as it seems they are likely using their short-term cash to pay for long-term factories to produce the drugs in high demand. But it definitely needs to be monitored, and as in the case of a downturn, and if the cash flow stops, this might become a big issue. While for Eli Lilly, long-term average is sitting at around 1.2. It is not entirely healthy, but it's not as low as for Novo Nordisk. But in 2025 they overpassed that threshold of 1.5 and they are above industry average, which is sitting at around 1.4. And lastly, debt to EBITDA for both companies is well below 3. They are well on the safe side, and if they get any good deals, they can take more debt if they need it. Now, before we go to conclusions, let's look at both companies' pipeline. For Eli Lilly, we have 4 drugs. The first one that is coming out is in 2026 is orforglipron, which estimated peak revenue should be around 41 billion. Second drug in the pipeline for 2027 is their premium drug obesity, which targets more than 25% of weight loss and is estimated to make anywhere between 15 and 20 billion. And then another drug in 2027 is for Alzheimer's, which is expected to make around 6 billion, and 3 billion will come from genetic high cholesterol when it will be launched in 2028 or later. So quite an impressive pipeline from Eli Lilly. But keep in mind that the first 2 drugs might cannibalize sales of Zepbound, so you cannot say that revenue will double, let's say from 2027 onwards, but it would definitely be very close to it. Now let's look at pipeline from Novo Nordisk, and here we already see a more modest pipeline. CagriSigma, which is expected to be launched in December 2026, should be a response to Lilly drugs, but unfortunately it fell short of expectations. So now addressable market is more in line with Zepbound failures, so for people who cannot use Eli Lilly's products, with estimated revenue peak of around 4.4 billion. Then we have already available drug that was just launched a few months ago. It is oral Wegovy, which is estimated revenue of around 8 to 10 billion, and here we can see that addressable market is existing injectable switchers. So here definitely we have the same story as for Eli Lilly, so these 2 drugs will cannibalize sales of Wegovy. Then we have HeyShield, which will create 2 to 4 billion dollars in revenue, and this is for MASH, so fatty liver disease. And also keep in mind, HeyShield is only for European market, so as Wegovy is already approved for MASH in the USA. And this is one of the advantages Wegovy currently holds over all other Lilly drugs, because they're not approved for this disease. And the last drug that is expected to come out in 2027 is for heart failures, which is expected to generate anywhere up to $2 billion. So now the real question is, which company should you buy? No doubt that Lilly is better positioned for the obesity market and also has a better pipeline, at least on paper. Both companies are money powerhouse, making good return well above market averages. So moving forward, we have a few scenarios. Scenario number 1 is price war and cost reduction. It might come from government or from intensified competition, but here both companies lose. Lilly has to lower prices. This means lower revenue. At the end, this means lower stock price. Here Lilly might fall even harder than Novo, which already took a hit, and flat revenue is expected. Scenario number 2 is no meaningful competition from other players, no price war, and here Lilly comes ahead, especially if the revenue expectations are met. If more drugs from the pipeline hit and even more drugs enter the pipeline, Lilly might be the first health stock to surpass 2 trillion in the next 5 years, which is a double from where it currently sits. Currently it seems that markets favors Lilly, which is definitely a buy now if you believe in the second point, but you have to be cautious, as the expectations are set very high. So if you're buying the stock at these current levels, also consider an exit strategy, because in my eyes it's currently overvalued as with all expectations, and it might continue to be overvalued in the future, but once this cools off, the price will certainly fall. On the other hand, I believe Novo is now significantly undervalued, as this negative sentiment is overblown. Depending on your risk profile, I would put it like this. If you're a value investor, in my eyes the answer at current price is Novo Nordisk. As we saw in the chart, Novo is building a massive empire of production facilities. They are using their own cash to buy out suppliers like Catalent, they carry significantly less debt than the industry average, and their 2026 valuation is much more reasonable, especially following recent market corrections. On top of that, they have a stable 5% dividend. We can describe them as they are slow and steady. They might continue to sail at these suppressed valuations for the near future, but we have to take into account that they are now selling for the valuation that was last seen even before they had the obesity market. And now they're again selling for the same price as if they exit this market completely. But that is not the case, they still hold 50% of it, or a little bit less than that. On the other hand, if you are a growth investor, Eli Lilly currently has the upper hand. While they carry more debt and have a more aggressive financial structure, their 2025 return on assets numbers prove they're converting those assets into profit at a record-breaking pace. They will have new oral pill, orforglipron. This drug will hit the market this year, and more diversified pipeline in Alzheimer's and cancer. So Lilly is well positioned to be the good investment if they deliver on all these promises. Between these two videos on screen, I've detailed the financials, future projections, and why I set my personal buying price for Novo at $47.50 and $600 for Eli Lilly. Feel free to watch these two videos to see the full picture, and I hope I'll see you there. Thank you so much for watching, and bye bye.